every day more and more testimony of the absolute evil of Hamas, the things that they have done, and yet European partners and allies still can't seem to find the backbone. You had mentioned that we're on the cusp of an international conflict, but despite that, the Europeans are still calling for complete ceasefires with Hamas. I mean, do they not have a role to play in an international conflict that will affect them too?
Listen, I mean, that's very, very sad, what you just said. I think that what Israel should do always is to make sure that this analogy between Hamas and ISIS is being strengthened, being actually getting some teeth to it by providing or introducing everybody with what happened here. But I would dare say also two things about Europe. Europe should understand that West is next when it comes to such atrocities in the Middle East. We have seen that in both cases, Qaeda and ISIS. They know it. If they are doing that because they are afraid of their Muslim constituencies in their own respective states, you know what? Europe is doomed. And I'll tell you why. This is high time for the European leadership to start dealing with that problem. And in my opinion, the other thing that we must be reckoned with is the Jews in the world. World Jewry is under threat here, and we have to think or rethink about the relationship between Israel and the Jews in order to make it better for both.
That's actually a perfect time to bring in our next point, because joining us in this conversation is going to be a journalist from Britain right now, Josh Rahm, who is commenting on what we've seen in the streets of London over the past few weeks. Hundreds of thousands of pro-Hamas protesters just a couple of weeks ago condemning Israel, demanding a ceasefire that would grant Hamas victory. Well, finally, we've seen some sort of response from pro-Israel demonstrators just yesterday, at least 50,000 strong. Josh, it's good to have you with us. Describe exactly what we were seeing in London and what the ramifications of that might be.
Well, we've seen scenes of widespread anti-Semitism in London. We've seen over the past, since October the 7th, pro-Palestinian protesters have taken to the streets every single Saturday. That is, every single Shabbat. You know, even on the day after October the 7th, before a single shot had even been fired in self-defense, pro-Palestinian protesters took to the streets. But yesterday really was a history-making moment. Over 105,000 people from across the UK, both Jewish and Gentile, Jewish and Israeli allies alike, took a stand and marched from the Royal Courts of Justice down the Embankment and to Parliament Square in London to take a stand against the scenes of anti-Semitism that we've seen taken across the UK, that we've seen just even yesterday, the day of this history-making march, we saw an anti-Israel and frankly an anti-Semitic protester start verbally abusing Jewish passengers on the train in London. So this was a huge moment where, we had a few politicians there. Tom Tugendhat was there. Robert Jenrick was there from the UK government. We had British celebrities like Tracy Ann Oberman, TV broadcaster Vanessa Feltz, all marching with, Jews from across the country and also non-Jewish allies taking a stand against anti-Semitism, but also indicating support for Israel, because whatever Israel does has a widespread effect on Jews across the diaspora. So this was a huge statement saying we are not going to take anti-Semitism on the streets in London or across the UK anymore. And it really was an unprecedented, and also dare I say, this was a peaceful march. The pro-Palestinian protesters, we've seen signs saying keep the world clean with Star of David's being put in the bin. Even yesterday, the chief rabbi, called for the civilians in Gaza and expressed worry for the civilians in Gaza. This was very much a peaceful march. Very few arrests were made, if any arrests, except for one right-wing extremist who the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism explicitly stated was not welcome on the march. So, there was a real emphasis of bring our hostages home. We're not going to take anti-Semitism on the streets, and also a call for peace.
But it's not really that simple. Certainly at the higher levels of the political establishment, there is support for Israel, at least on paper, at least in statement. But practically speaking, we see the voting base of the country heavily divided. If you do polling in London, support for the Palestinian side is probably higher than it is for the Israeli side. We've seen police not intervening in any of the displays of violence at the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests we've seen across London. And that divide, while certainly you see upper levels saying one thing, the streets have their own voice, and that's sometimes a lot more important. And I also want to let our analyst here, Rabbi, jump into this discussion because you have some points to make as well during this. But first, I want to let Josh, I want you to answer that one.
And this is the point, because point of the unprecedented and history-making protest yesterday was also protesting the police inactivity when it comes to these anti-Semitic incidents that we've seen on our streets. And, I was part of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism protest a few weeks back outside Scotland Yard in the centre of London, demanding that the police take more action when it comes to this, saying that, I think what you were describing about the divide, I think first of all, foremost, there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to this conflict on the on a wider scale, especially on social media. Israel is fighting a misinformation war. There's a lot of talk about proportionality, a lot of talk about self-defense and what constitutes that, and people, I think, very casually forget that the only reason why Israeli cities do not look like Gaza at the moment is because of the Iron Dome technology. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions on social media. Like any society, Britain is divided politically, not just over the Israeli, this Israeli conflict, but also there are, of course, wider political issues at play with dealing with, things like the cost of living crisis, the Tory government. So I think some people use this Israel conflict as a kind of microcosm for wider political issues. But I will say, especially if yesterday's march was anything to go by, part of the reason why we are marching as a community, Friends of Israel, allied to the Jewish community, is to take a stand against, or not to take a stand, because we do thank the police for doing their jobs and keeping us, or at least attempting to keep us safe, but also to protest the inactivity that's been going on and saying a big fat no to anti-Semitism.
Uzi, do we even have the power to beat these false narratives that Josh is talking about?
Well, we should try actually to do our utmost efforts to fight back, because this is something which is becoming, it's not a wave, it's a tsunami. And if we are not going to do something about that, I am afraid that European Jewry would find itself under a siege, by all means and proposals, a siege. And this is
there
why
already is a siege.
Sorry?
There already is a siege.
Yeah,
Yesterday we were chanting never again is now. We've been seeing propaganda on the streets of London on placards at these pro-Palestinian protests that is not akin that is akin to 1930s Germany during the height of the Holocaust. That is why we take to the streets to say never again is now.
Yeah, but what I tried actually also to notice is that for years, it's not just out of the blue what you see here. For years, Hamas, Muslim Brothers, and others, basically hold networks of financial nature and operational stuff that is very, very well evident in both London, France, etc. We know that there are some associations, Muslim associations, so to speak, who are financing actually the activities of Hamas, of Muslim Brothers and others. We know, on the other hand, that Iran is playing, actually trying to fan the flame with its apparatus there. It has been long that we do see that. If you are going to add to the Islamic green what I would call the progressive red, you would get what actually in America we see. It's the red-green alliance. This is very dangerous. And I hope it's not too late, but we have to fight it back, because it's becoming kind of a real tsunami under which, actually, as I said before, European Jewry is at a risk, and there is kind of an existential questions that are coming to the fore. It is time for us, Israel and Jews, to act together and see what we can to do in order actually to change the this rhythm and direction of things, because this is very dangerous.
Josh, I actually want to build off of that last point, because in England, particularly championed by the left, we did see the British state and the British police given enormous amounts of power to shut down discussion, to shut down extremism. At least 4,000 arrests every single year in England for tweets online that go against political narratives or offensive. These powers exist for a reason. This would be the time to use it against extremism. Why do we not see the establishment using the powers that they gave themselves against an actual rise in extremism and anti-Semitism?
Well, I think to a certain extent they are using those powers. You know, we have seen an increase of 1,350% of anti-Semitic incidents, and the government has tried to act quickly in trying to offer reassurances to the Jewish community here. I think it's there is this kind of quandary about freedom of speech, because of course, supporting Palestinian self-determination doesn't necessarily mean you support Hamas. A lot of us passionately believe in a two-state solution and continue to advocate for that, as well as, of course, the right for Israel to exist and defend itself. So I think, there's a lot of quandary about that. There is a different sort of atmosphere in this country when it comes to these debates as well. I think the British government has been kind of very clear in saying, we support Israel's right to exist and defend itself. We support Israel's right to get these hostages back. But I think I'm not sure if it's necessarily there is this particular answer for it. I think because this anti-Semitism has been so widespread.
I want to pass to Uzi because he wants to respond.
After the march.
What these guys are saying, it's not either Hamas or Fatah. We have to understand that. From the river to the sea, Palestine would be free. This is de-Zionization of Israel. You have to understand that. We are under attack, which comes from that.
And that's...
No, I completely understand this. And, this is why the government has actually banned that chant from the river to the sea being chanted from near kind of Jewish synagogues and Jewish sites, because they do recognize there is this kind of this kind of vibe of intimidation, so to speak. But
definitely,
saying that,
we
the Jewish
are
community
seeing
has
that the
called
political establishment is recognizing this, and they are starting to jump in. I want to thank both of you for being in the studio with me, Josh, for helping us understand the voice of the street there in London, in England as a whole right now, and the political establishment. Uzi, for helping us understand the stakes internationally. That said, for everyone else, we are out of time for our show.